Welcome to The Bridge. Fun conversations on culture, life, and everything in between.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Bridge. We are a show that connects East and West. My name is Jason. I am from California, sunny California, and where I was born and raised, and I've been living in China for the last 10 years or so. I'm in beautiful Wuhan. Today with me is Beibei.
Yes, hi, Jason, how are you? And hi, listeners.
I'm wonderful. It is a beautiful afternoon here in beautiful Wuhan, China, and I'm going to go for a bicycle ride in a little while. I'm excited about that.
Nice.
Find us where you get your podcasts. If you like the show, then consider pushing the like button or giving us 5 stars. Suggestions, comments, anything you would like to share, email us at welovethebridge@gmail.com. We love the bridge. I wanted to talk about culture shock. And so I wanted to start this off actually from an expat perspective. As an expat, I have and do work with a lot of other expatriates. Just a real quick, a lot of people are like, oh, what's an expat? An expat's not an immigrant. An immigrant is someone who moves to another country to try to live there forever. Expats generally move to a place to live there for a period of time. So a lot of expats or people would-be expats, I should say, come over to China and then they, I would say, wig out, or they're not able to cope after a few weeks. And some of them we call pull a runner. And this means they pull a runner. This is literally the language in expat like bubbles. So to pull a runner is to call from the airport and say, you know, I'm going home for X, Y, and Z reasons and I can't handle it.
Really?
And da-da-da. A lot of time you get the feeling that they're not comfortable. And a lot of times they will give different reasons than maybe the real reasons. They'll be like, oh, well, my mom's health isn't good or whatever, and I need to go home suddenly. But that excuse is usually compounded by the fact that they were visibly uncomfortable. A lot of these people, I've noticed there's a trend. They never even left their hometown. They're like, I've never left my hometown of, 100,000 people or 50,000 people. And I think my first sojourn, after college is going to be China or like South Korea. This happens there, or Japan or something. And it's like, maybe you should have tried a different town in this, first to see if that was okay with you. Companies spend a lot of money moving expatriates, people from England and Canada, Australia, and the United States to come to like Japan and South Korea and China and other places to be educators and other things. They pay for the flight. They pay bonuses for signing the contract. They pay for a couple of weeks of a hotel. They invest people, like their own people, to go help them find an apartment and to like maybe even loan them money to get an apartment. And if for these small minority of people, like, maybe 5%-ish of people who suddenly can't handle it and run home, the companies that invested in their moving to China lose a lot of money. So
yeah, but can I ask, like, for people who kind of run away from China, like, what are some of the main reasons? Like, what's scary, or what are some of the shocks that they can't take? I'm just curious.
So there's this discipline in academics called cultural anthropology, and it deals with this exact topic, and it's called culture shock. So generally people, when they arrive, this is why vacations are so fun. The first week or two when someone goes to a new culture, a new place, a new way of being, people are generally like, wow, this is how it's done. Look at all the colors and all the people, and they're so different, and they have different colors.
And the food.
Yeah, and the food. Yeah, and it's like very lovely and interesting. And then it's like, but I don't understand anything. And but people stand and okay, so I wanted to go down a list of some of the reasons why, and because I'm an American, I can only really speak what it's like to be an American. I moved to South Korea and I moved to China, and both of, there are differences. So one of the things I noticed when I first moved here, it doesn't really affect me now. I don't even notice it, but it's like the way people queue in a line. So in the States, if you stand like a meter away from the person in front of you, you're in line. You're in line. Where in China, people see you standing a meter away from the line, they're like,
you're out.
Well, that guy's still deciding. I'm just going to get in. I'm going to get in line. And so for like Americans, they're like, someone just cut me off. And they're like, why would they do that? And it's nothing about them. The Chinese person or the Korean person too, they didn't really think you were in the line. It wasn't like a slight. It wasn't a slight or like I win. It was more like they legitimately were like, you're a meter away from the person in front.
You're still hesitating.
Yeah, Americans are like, we need our personal space a lot of the time.
Right,
There's a famous episode of Seinfeld, the TV show.
Right, I love it.
Where there's this guy, the close talker, and he walks up really close to people in the face and starts talking to them and invades their personal space. This is a big deal for Americans. They're like, but in China, people aren't really close talkers. I shouldn't say that, but a lot of people in China, they're like, they queue a little closer. It's not like mean to be offensive or anything. They just stand up maybe a foot. That's an American term. They stand about a foot behind the person in front of them. And if you're in China, if you're like 2 or 3 feet away from the person in front of you, people aren't sure, are you in line or not? Some people have asked me, are you in line?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in line. And that's so I've learned to stand a little bit closer. And so this is just one of those things. So it's so small and it's almost imperceptible to like, you know, people living here and like living in China but for some people they come from some town in like Nebraska or Kentucky or some, you know, they don't think about this. And suddenly this small, tiny, really distinct feature becomes a big deal for them.
Also, like the places you mentioned in the States, like things are more spread out. You just don't have the population density. But here in Chinese cities, like if you want to get in line, you need to get in line. Right? You've been to train stations many times by now.
Yeah.
Right? Hundreds of people are getting ready to get on a train. They can't afford like a meter apart.
Yeah.
Right?
It wouldn't work.
It wouldn't work. You would be outside the airport.
Yeah.
But I mean, nowadays at, you know, pandemic times if you're going for like one of those testing sites, maybe they suggest that you stand a meter apart and they will have like dots on the ground where you're supposed to stand there. But normally, everything is a little closer because, I mean, it's for expats, they're probably coming into these cities, right? Instead of suburbs or villages and towns. So I think that's another reason why. It's just higher population density. Culture-wise too.
There are a lot of cultural differences I want to talk about later, but just the ones that I've noticed people get culture shock by. Another one is volume. So like, for example, we just talked about my mother-in-law's living here. Sometimes when my wife and my mother-in-law are talking, they're like talking like this. Hey, da, da, da. And I'll be like, is everything okay? And they're like, yeah, what kind of dumplings are we going to have for dinner? It's like, oh, okay. So I've noticed a lot of expats when what's wrong? Why do you feel this way? They'll say like, well, everyone yells at me. And I'm like,
oh my God.
I think that they're just misunderstanding. You know, they're smiling. You meet a taxi driver. They're like, hey, hello, my friend. Da, da, da. They're really excited. And I think a lot of foreigners, they're like, why is he yelling? It's so loud. And like, but they just mean to be friendly and stuff. And people, you know, have a difficult time understanding that. Yeah.
Yeah, especially like in Wuhan. We mentioned this last time. The Wuhan dialect. It literally just sounds like people are bickering. Like they're arguing over everything. But they're actually just talking. But some people are bickering. But in most cases, that's just like the way their dialect sounds like. Or, you know, when it comes to space, personal space, I think that's the focal point of the cultural differences between the Chinese society and, like, say, American society. Because I think that's what shocked me the most.
Where did you move to? Where did you move to when you moved?
We landed in New Jersey.
What would you say your first like month? What were the things that you noticed?
Well, first month was summertime, so there was like nobody around. And then September came around and I started school in high school. And I think if you ask me one thing about, you know, what kind of culture shock I had, I would say space or distance between people. It's very different. And one thing I noticed, I felt that, you know, in the States, everybody is really nice. You know, everybody's really friendly. You know, back in high school or when I started work and just people you meet, they're very nice. But it's hard to bond. You know what I mean? It's hard to establish a personal bond. It's like, I'm nice, but please keep a certain distance. I think that bit was a little bit difficult for me. And for the 4 years that I studied in high school, I have to admit that I felt pretty lonely. And it's lonely. Of course, I mean, when I first arrived, there was the language barrier. I mean, I literally couldn't speak in English. But that only took a couple month time. For me to learn the language and start communicating. It happened pretty fast. But, that was just only part of it. A lot of it more was cultural. And the distance that I felt wasn't just relationship-wise. It was also physical distance. People lived further apart. Yeah. And also in school, the students move around. Like I would have, you would have homeroom for like 10 minutes or so. And then everybody just scatters. There isn't like a long period of time where you spend with, like friends. I felt like I didn't have enough time and the stability to bond with people very well. We kept moving around. And that was very, very different from the junior high years that I spent in China. The highlights of my life, there are a couple segments. And the junior high, 3 years in junior high spent in Wuhan, in China, those were one of the happiest segment from my life. And the happiness, like work, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of things to study, and we worked till late into the night studying, but it was so much fun because we were in this together, the whole class. There were over 50 of us. Wow. So the over 50 of us, we stayed in the same classroom for 3 years. Wow. With the same set of teachers. So it was a family in itself. And the teachers, like for all our classes, they were the same ones for 3 years. So the teachers and students were bond. They were like our moms and dads in school and the classmates. We weren't friends with everyone. There are students you liked and there are ones you don't like, right? Sure, yeah. But you get to pick and choose. Yeah. And I happen to my best girlfriend, even to this day, in the first year of junior high. And that has made all the difference. And it wasn't just my relationship with her, but also with the rest of the kids. There's got to be a couple kids that you like. You have your little niche or group. I remember we would, sometimes we would have nighttime study. Like we will be in the school. We will go back to school after dinner and study for a few more hours until like 9 o'clock. It sounds terrible, right? But it was so much fun because we were doing this together. It
didn't sound terrible. I love that. Really? Yeah, about college.
I know.
Yeah, about college, I loved being in the library amongst the dusty books and walking out and the sun's like coming up. It's like, I felt so
what a nerd.
This is what it's, yeah, anyways. But you mentioned space really quickly. The space is a big deal in America. That's why everyone has a car. That's why a family living in a single house sometimes has 2 or 3 cars. Right. Because every member of that household who's above 16 has a car. Because if you want to go somewhere, you have to have a car. If you don't have a car, you can't get there because it's so far. Whereas like in China, like you're in a big city. I'm in Wuhan and I'm actually in what we call like a suburban kind of like area. I could walk outside and there's restaurants within 5 minutes everywhere, every direction I walk. It's so like, I don't need a car. People have cars. Sure, they do in China. They absolutely have cars, but it's not the same where like you have to get in a car and drive 20 minutes to go somewhere.
It's not as necessary. Yeah. That's one thing, I think one of the reasons why I decided to come back, because I don't like driving. I think it's a very harsh psychological toll. It takes a psychological toll on me because I think it makes me nervous. But then if I stay in the States, the only place where I can live without getting a car is like, New York City or Boston, maybe, somewhere with the subway station.
Yeah, certainly not LA.
Right. But so here, in Beijing, I don't need to worry about that. Right? There are so many ways to get around. Yeah. So that's like a huge relief. But of course, I know most people don't suffer from this. I just really don't like driving.
I mean, actually with you, I don't like driving too. I could easily afford a car, but I don't want one. I'd just rather have like use a Didi or like ride my bicycle or walk or like take the subway.
And the hassle of finding a parking space.
I have a list. So you have finding a parking space, paying for parking. You have changing your tires, rotating your tires, changing your oil, car maintenance. You have to pay for your insurance. You have to make your car payment. You have to have the down payment for the car. Right. Like sometimes in Beijing, you need to have a parking space that you pay for that accompanies you. You have to either rent or buy a parking space. And then like, oh my gosh. And then if you want to walk around, you have to go back to the same place that you left your car. You can't just like get a Didi see on the other side of the park. You have to go back to where you came from because your car's there now. Like, it's so inconvenient. Why would you want a car?
Yeah, so I don't. I don't drive, and there's a subway. It connects everywhere. I mean, my point, what I was saying, my experience from high school is with, back in China, there was always this sense of belonging. When I was with my family, and by family, we don't just mean mom and dad. It's like the whole big family, your aunts and uncles and your cousins, There's a sense of belonging. I belong to this family, and it's a huge support. It's the background of your life. And then when you go to school, your school is a little community. Your class is a little community. You belong to that class. I mean, we just reconnected this WeChat group of my elementary school kids. So with that class, we stayed together for 5 years, from when we were 6 till we were 11.
Wow.
Some were 12. So, you always have this sense of belonging and this sense of security. And then all of a sudden for me, when I moved to the States and started high school, everybody was moving around. And it took me like 3 years to make a friend. I finally had a really good friend in junior, maybe the second part of junior year, and then all through senior year. And I felt so much better. It's like I finally can take root, There's someone I can talk to. And we were both like nerds. But, nice, normal nerds. We weren't like weird or anything. And we would talk about books, and we were all very good students. And I felt so much happier. So for us, the sense of belonging is very important.
Well, certainly, like when you were in the United States for a long time. May I ask how many years?
Over 10.
So this is something I want to come back. I wanted to come back to later, but it's actually maybe a good time now. You eventually returned to China because you're living in Beijing now.
Right.
May I ask, upon your return, did you find some things a little different, like a little weird? We call this reverse culture shock.
Not really. I mean, I think it's much easier for me to start building a web of relationships, to be falling into something, like to belong again. I mean, once I came back, it was so easy to make friends. And that was very, very soothing, I think. I mean,
yeah, for you, it seems like it's very much about networking with people. That seems to be your thing.
Well, that doesn't sound right, though. Because when you say networking, it's like, it's got this business tinge to it. It's like I'm doing business. But here, it's just making friends. That's how I would put it. For example, when I started working at the radio station, like my coworkers were my friends. They are still my friends. I go to work, it's like I chat with my friends. And that's how when I first arrived back here, that's how I started building my social network. It sounds like I'm building something, but it's actually, that's how my social network formed, from my workplace. And that offered me the sense of belonging. I'm making myself sound like a very vulnerable and lonely person. I'm not. It's just like, I think going from China to Western countries, you are throwing things off. What I mean is, when you grow up in the Chinese culture, you grew up with, I wouldn't say baggages because that has a negative connotation to it, but you grew up with connections, right? You are connected to your family, to your loved ones, to your friends and neighbors and your classmates. These are all relationships that you've built up in your life. But when I went to the States, I kind of I felt like all those things were falling apart.
Let me see if I can redirect you to some of the cultural aspects I was hoping to elicit.
Sure.
So let me give you, I'll give you some examples. When you were in the United States, did you see guns?
Not while I was there. I think that became...
Like cops with guns? Did you see the cops wearing the guns?
I know they have guns, but never pointed at me.
I mean, but you never saw... See, for me, growing up in the States, firstly, lots of people have guns. So, one of my brothers, he's into guns. And I've seen I grew up in this place called Oakdale, and lots of people there have guns. They have their gun collection. Oh. Some people have like a place in their backyard where they have you open it up and there's like
shooting
guns.
Range?
Like, I'm not...
Oh my God.
Not just a shooting range, like, machine guns and stuff. Like,
whoa.
Yeah. And I've been robbed at gunpoint, and like all the cops I've ever seen, I could see their gun on their holster. And I've seen guns in people's on their like ankles and stuff. So I come to China and it's like, there's no guns. Not even the cops. The cops don't have guns. No one has guns. Like, it's just like, okay, the guns are now gone. So like, this is a cultural, I'm not saying I wasn't shocked by it. Either way, when I went back to the United States, I wasn't shocked by it because I know very well about like the fact that this is a thing. But it is a huge difference that I noticed between these two massive cultures that in China, guns are like for soldiers, you know, like no one else has guns.
Right.
And like, and in the United States, there's just like, I could hear the gun range from my mom's house, you know?
Oh my gosh. Well, see here, it's odd that you talk about this because we don't think about this. Like guns are not in anybody's mind unless you are a soldier or special force in the police. Otherwise, it's never part of the conversation. People don't even talk about it.
When you were living in New Jersey, I guess, or where else you lived in the United States, did you ever feel like unsafe or like were you ever touched by criminality or your friends touched by criminality?
No. All the years that I was in the
Wow.
States, I was fine. I mean, we lived simple lives. I mean, for us Chinese people, we don't go places, man. we go to like Costco, we go to Chinese supermarkets, we go to the Chinese restaurants, and then go to school. We live very simple lives. We don't go to bars.
Wow.
We don't go for, what do you call it? Like dance or raving, things like that.
I was a library nerd, but like I had a car stolen. I was in one of my universities. I went to several universities. I was in one of them. I came out, my car was gone. I was like, okay, the police find it like a week later where it's like just a pile of parts, you know, like serious. And I had another car where the radio was stolen out of that car. And then I replaced the radio and the radio was stolen out of that car again. And then I had, I was robbed at gunpoint one time. I was at a friend's party in their house and someone was stabbed at the party one time.
Oh my god!
I guess, you know, like maybe San Francisco. I guess New Jersey is the place to go because.
Hey, listen. Imagine if we are eating at a dinner banquet. We talk about dinner banquet the other day. And Jason, you started talking about this. Like all the Chinese guests will be like, literally, their chopsticks would be suspended midair and with like noodles drooling off the corner of their mouth. We're like, what is he talking about?
Yeah, you know, and
it's very shocking.
Sometimes you late at night, you know, 2 a.m. if I'm by myself, I certainly do feel scared. You know, I've been in areas where I didn't feel comfortable because I thought the possibility of my being like involved in someone else's criminal attempt on me was higher. And so like, I know what I mean is one of the things that I felt when I went back from my reverse culture shock is I never feel that way here in China anymore.
Right. That's good.
Like it's always safe. I've never feared that some criminality, anything bad was ever going to happen to me in that kind of way.
Yeah.
When I went back my first day, the second time I went back to the States after like 7 years of living here in China, I was on a train and I was like, I think I might get robbed today. And I was scared a little bit, you know? Yeah. And like, I guess nothing happened. It was all in my head a little bit, but because of my history of knowing about it and seeing like, you know.
Well, I lived in New Jersey for a few years and then our family moved to Virginia, which was also very nice. And then I went off to college and that was very nice. But as I said, I lived very simple lives. I never thought that was part of the scene. Maybe it was happening elsewhere to other people, but, you know, it was never part of my life, fortunately.
You go back to the States sometimes now, yeah? Every now and then?
I haven't been back for as long as the pandemic has been on.
Yeah.
But normally we would go back, you know, once a year and we'd travel. Yeah.
Another thing I noticed is I was here in China when we transitioned from using cash money to just using like Alipay and WeChat Pay and all this other stuff. And so like when I went back to visit my mom a few years ago, it was like, I got to carry cash now. And like, this is the way to pay for things. And like, I have all this dirty, like greasy money. Like I'm supposed to use that to get stuff.
Your mom be like, look at how spoiled you are now, Jason.
It was like really kind of strange. It was almost like nostalgic or something, like going back in time. It's like, okay, I got money again, I guess. It was it wasn't like a shocking thing, but it was definitely weird. It was definitely like being in the dream when I was using the money, like, why was this paper? here.
I think that's another reason why here, let's say if you pick pockets for a living here in China, nowadays, you're not going to have a lot of business because people don't carry around cash or their, valuable belongings.
Yeah, and if you steal someone's phone, you can't open it because you need their face and fingerprint and all this other stuff to get it open.
And also because people are so glued to their phones.
Yeah.
Like, you have no chance. They're always looking at their phone.
Well, I have a 5G phone, so even I can open my Xiaochu gate and my building gate with my phones. So it literally does actually, I can adjust the air conditioner temperature with my phone. Yeah, 5G is amazing. You got to get it. Got to get it, baby. I was telling you before.
Well,
you can do everything.
I am paying for it. I just don't know how to, get it. It's beyond me now. Yeah. Anyhow, well, I'm happy that we're living in safe places. And also, I have to say that the thing about guns and all, it really wasn't on our minds when I was living in the States. But it's been 10 years now since I lived there. And in the past few years, we do hear more about incidences, gun control in the news. I think it's becoming a little bit more frequent. And maybe because the economic background and also the pandemic, when people run out of ways to go upward, they will go somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't give people the path of mobility to go somewhere.
I think that's part of it. I think it's also mental illness is not being addressed in the United States. It's not. I think
you are so on the point. You are so right.
I think it is partially about people, they rob places because they need money because social mobility is not there. You're right. That happens. But these crazy shooters who just run in and start murdering people, a lot of them, they just need therapists or to be in an institution for a while where they can talk to someone about their problems or
Will you get into trouble saying this in the States?
No. Everyone talks about this in the States. Yeah.
I think that's a really great point that I missed myself. Another thing of cultural shock, I have to say, is that when you go to the States, you notice that there's a great diversity of people. And of course, when people speak of diversity, you think about where they come from, the country, nationality, and also race. But for me, and maybe for other immigrant families, you notice how there's a variety in mental states. The U.S. society is so much more tolerant of people outside, let's say, my understanding of being normal. You just
I think so many of our listeners must be laughing too.
Okay, I'm sorry. I try to put it.
No. That's great. Go on, please.
Something about Chinese culture. Let me start from here. There's something about Chinese culture is, let's say you meet somebody. There is somebody new, okay? And then there is this silent mental scan of this new person, of this stranger, to gauge how normal he is. This just goes around second nature, third nature, I'm not too sure, but in the back of your mind. Because I think in Chinese culture, I imagine there's a square, the square of normality. Most people fall into this square. And that's considered a good thing in this culture. We're not as good adapting to abnormality or people, So when you meet someone, you chat for a bit and then you gauge how normal he is. And if he falls into your square of normality, you kind of sigh of relief. Okay, this is someone I can talk to, like you, Jason. We talked a little bit, before we started our show. And I was like, he's perfectly fine. He's a normal person that you can communicate with. You can talk to them. And they would start saying things, so their responses are just off the grid. Well,
I think actually you're just defining, we were talking about Seinfeld earlier. The entire show of Seinfeld is about noticing the peculiarities about every new person they introduce to the show. I think it's universal a little bit. There's maybe in the United States, the range is bigger, but there's still
Exactly. The range is, the square is much, much bigger, but it's so big that it's a little beyond comprehension of a lot of Chinese people. It's way bigger. For example, we mentioned about you wearing shorts, right? In the wintertime in Wuhan. Now, for foreigners, we know that, oh, that's what they do. You know, some people, they do that. But if you see a local Chinese doing that, like wearing shorts in the wintertime, like that falls outside the square of normality.
Actually, you just pointed out something really interesting, baby. I'm sorry, I want to railroad over you a little bit here.
Sure, please.
As a foreigner, that's kind of one of the really nice things, because whatever weird thing we do, we can just say, oh, it's because we're a foreigner. And like, so
they know, yeah.
Whatever peculiar habits we might have, like we could just be like, yeah, it's because we're a foreigner. But you know, actually a lot of the foreigners over here, they're not necessarily falling within the range or the square of normality in their own countries either.
I think the test really comes when you start to communicate with that person, right? I think the other things they do, like what they eat, how they dress, that's external. Right? The internal is you have to talk to that person to see if he makes sense, to see if you can communicate with this person. And if you find that difficult, like you say something and what they bounce back is like on a totally different channel, and you try for a while and you see that you just can't establish a normal conversation. And then we know that, okay, maybe that's out of the area of the box of normality.
Let's back up. So you were talking about being in junior high school in the United States. High school, and you had your niche, and other people had their niche, and people have their friends, and you have your friends. I think there's also within Chinese culture, because it's not monolithic, that there's also just people that they get along with each other better, and maybe other people don't get along with them. I've seen, lots of Chinese people were like, no, I don't like that person. I think there's also just some people, they jive better. They have a better like wavelength with one another within different cultures too.
But the thing that I had a problem with back in high school was I did not have the chance to establish these relationships. We were moving around so much that I didn't really get to talk to anybody for like long periods of time. Like, for example, when I was back in junior high, it was the same class, same people for 3 years. And then we can, it's 10 minutes between classes. So we play together, we chat, right? And we lived closer together. But back in high school, I didn't live close to anybody. It was so spread out. If you have to set up dates to meet people, okay? And that just complicate things because you have to talk to your parents. And she has to talk to her parents, before we could drive. And to set up, it's just different from when, back in junior high. I just go up to my friend's apartment building and I'll just start, I'll stand downstairs and yell her name and she'll come down in a few minutes. And we would just go play.
I think we could also do an episode just on making friends. In Japan, they have this famous service, Rent a Friend, right?
Huh?
So like they have a service.
What?
This is not a dating service. This is not an escort service where you're hiring a beautiful, like tall woman to hang out with. This is like Rent a Friend. Sometimes you can actually rent a whole family. So you can rent like a brother and a sister and a mom and a dad and like go out in public.
What?
People rent friends to go and talk at the coffee shop with. And, they become actual friends.
Wow.
There's a financial
That's
component.
sad.
I know.
I'm sorry.
I know. But my point is like making friends in all kinds of different cultures. And it's really complicated and it's not always as simple as it seems. But I wanted to pivot a little bit.
Sure.
Have you ever heard in China or maybe in the States the phrase, when in Rome, or sometimes it's said, when in Rome, do as the Romans do?
Right, of course, yes.
This is a huge thing for a field, an academic field called cultural anthropology. And in cultural anthropology, these people train, cultural anthropologists, they train to go and live in other cultures. Sometimes this could mean like living in Papua New Guinea in the jungle with like Papua New Guinean people and speaking their language and learning about their culture. And sometimes it could be a corporate culture. So going to work in Baidu temporarily. And then you give feedback to the managers about what the corporate culture looks like from a certain angle so that they can make adjustments to their company to increase efficiency and happiness among the employees.
Right.
So I learned a lot about this before I came to China. And so for me, it was like, come to China. Okay, this is what people eat, and this is how kind of people they communicate. So I'm going to try to communicate in that way. And I think for a lot of people who move abroad, this is something they really should think about, because I know a lot of expats who still live in China who like, 95% of the food they eat is the food from back home. They go exclusively to like pizza places, hamburger joints. And like, I'm not trying to complain or rat these people out,
Right.
but like, maybe, why come to China?
They're missing out, right?
And then not like try to like live a little bit like the people in China do. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's like cloistered off, and they're like little, we call this the bubble, the expat bubble. So a lot of people who've even, not just people who've lived here 1 or 2 years, people who've come here and they've lived here for 10 years. And then you're like, oh yeah, what kind of Chinese food? And they're like, I don't eat Chinese food. And in my mind, I'm like, what are you talking about? This is China. You've been here.
Have the hot, dry noodles. Try it. It's really good.
How? And they're like, oh, my stomach doesn't. I think that's an excuse. My stomach doesn't agree with it. They're just like not willing to step out a little bit. You're in another country. You go, if I was in Japan, I would be eating sushi. If I'm like in Italy, I'd be eating pasta. If I'm like in,
right.
That's.
At least try it.
Yeah.
And also, I want to ask you about something. So it's also about social distance. In China, you probably have noticed, like when people, even people you don't know very well, let's say you're introduced to somebody's aunt or uncle, and they'll start, just chatting and asking you questions. Usually it starts with, how old are you?
Yeah.
Right? And then like, are you married? What do you do?
What do you do? Yeah.
Or even they'll get to, how much money do you make? And for someone who has never been outside China, especially in the States, we don't think that's anything odd. We're just getting to know you. And maybe they have a friend in mind that, they could connect you with, things like that, or a job offer that I think will be suitable. You don't know until you you establish the basics.
Yeah.
But then I know that back in the States, you don't do that, right? Unless you know this person.
You don't ask a woman her age in the South. You don't go to Louisiana and say, how old are you, ma'am?
Well, I don't know what's going to happen after that, but
oh my goodness,
he's so rude. But the thing is, I've learned that in the States, you don't ask these questions, right? You're very conscious of whether or not you're invading people's private or personal space.
Yeah.
Here, not so much worry about that. I think, was that a bit of a shock for you?
I'm actually I don't have a filter sometimes. So I'm one of those people that just likes to lay it all out there and like just talk about whatever. So when I came to China, it was almost like a better suited people were just like, yeah, how old are you? I was like, yeah, okay, I'm this old. How old are you? Okay, what do you do? Oh, yeah. It felt really natural to me, actually, because I'm not one of those people that like, actually, I want to tell a story.
Sure.
I was considered, this is not something to do with China. Okay, this has to do with me. And I guess when I was a young man, I was not a courteous person. So I would,
really?
Yeah. So this is a phone thing. We used to have the phones that ring and they were hanging on the wall with the cord.
Right.
So people would call most often to talk to my mom. And I'd just be like, yeah, what's up? Who do you want to talk to? They're just like, people would say on the phone, my dear Jason, that's not how you answer the phone. And this happened for like years. You should say, why, hello, how are you? And ask me how I am. Right. And then blah, blah, blah. And this wasn't just like one cousin or something that said this to me. It was a lot of folks. But like, I like to get down to whatever is relevant. Okay, you're calling. Right. Obviously, there's someone you want to talk to.
What you want?
Who's that? So yeah, what do you want? Who do you want to talk to? Why are you calling? Yeah. So like, I got a lot of people like telling my mom, wow, you really need to help Jason, like, work on his courtesies and stuff. Like,
that's funny.
So when people in China were like, how old are you? And like, how much money do you make? It was just like, okay, yeah, what do you make?
Let's get some social surveys done.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's really funny. So I don't want people, coming into China to get shocked, to think that people are trying to invade your personal space. It's just friendly chatting to kind of establish like who you are, right? How you're going to fit into this place, how they can help you with good intentions. But I think after a while, you get used to it because you will feel that people have good intentions and they're actually friendly. Yeah. And once you have, once that's established, you can forgive a lot of other things. Yeah. So culture shock.
Yeah, culture shock. Well, I mean, reverse culture shock, I think, is a big deal for me. I want to tell another story. I grew up in a smallish kind of town. I was called Modesto. I mean, I always talk about Oakdale and Modesto. I spent like a lot of time in both when I was a young man. Not young, a boy, when I was a boy. And eventually I thought of San Francisco as the big city, you know, or Sacramento even. And obviously those are not big cities. And everyone who's listening at home is like, oh yeah, those are just cities. I think San Francisco's population is like less than 1 million. So it's actually really small, even by American standards. But for me, in the San Joaquin Valley, California, I looked at San Francisco as the shining, like, metropolitan place on a hill. And when I went there, I felt, wow, I'm in the city. This is so cool. And like, it's so busy and there's so much stuff. So I moved to Beijing and I lived there for quite a while. I didn't go back home for like 5 years. I was just like, you know, I want to really get into, there was so much. And I traveled
so
around
much to
a lot
explore.
in Shandong and other places. And eventually I did go home because I was like, you know, I'm being rude to my family. I need to go back and be like, hey, how's it going, mom and dad? So I went back and my first thing was I landed in SFO and I was like, okay, I'm going to take a day for myself before I go home to my parents and just, you know, go check out the city again. And I went down.
Wait.
Yeah.
Wait. You flew back? Wait, did nobody pick you up at the airport?
They live in the San Joaquin Valley. I just got out of SFO. I told them you can meet me at the end of this train called the BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, where it meets in like Pleasanton, Dublin, about halfway to my parents' house from San Francisco.
Sorry.
That way they don't have to drive so far. They were old and I didn't want them to drive all the way into SF. Plus I wanted to kind of see the city again because I spent a decade there too. And I wanted to really, so I went downtown to Embarcadero and I was like, oh, this is so exciting. And then I looked around and I was like, this seems so small. Like it was actually like even some of the tallest buildings in San Francisco are actually smaller than like the housing complex I'm in now right now. I mean, I'm on the 17th floor of a housing complex. And this is probably as tall as the Transamerica building in San Francisco. And this is just one of hundreds and hundreds of or thousands of buildings in Wuhan. And so I was very underwhelmed. It was almost like the feeling when I was living in San Francisco, when I went to go visit my family in the San Joaquin Valley and elsewhere, it felt like I was going to a small town. When going from Beijing to San Francisco, it felt like I was going to a small town. It was just, it was also so sparse. Like people were not, it wasn't as busy as I remember it. It was just like people were spaced out. And it was just like kind of this reverse culture shock of kind of like,
where is everybody?
Being let down. Yeah, this isn't the city that I thought it was when I was younger because, you know, obviously Shanghai and Beijing and all these other cities I'd experienced in Asia. And I've been to Tokyo and like Taipei. And I went back and San Francisco's this tiny little town. And that was a kind of a shock for me to some extent. And I was like, okay, cool.
This reminds me of what my mom told me because she, you know, she grew up in a Chinese village and, you know, she used to talk about this huge tree in the village. That's like, you know, how she will locate her village and all that and whatever else things that are under that tree. But she said years later when she went back and actually saw that tree, she was like, what? That's it? That tree was huge. This is just a tree. So all the years, you know, her world was expanded by so much. And also, I mean, she grew up herself. So, you know, I guess it's from a different perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, I think when you go back to the States, there's also the sense of just where is everybody? You know, you know that people live here, but where are they? You know, any suburb. We live in the suburb. There are houses, there are cars, there are like no people outdoors.
You're right, yeah.
I mean, if you go to the park, you get to see people jogging or, you know,
maybe
weekend.
A little bit.
Yeah, over the weekend.
You're absolutely right. In my mom's hometown, I was like, okay, I want to go see, you know, her town. So I left in the morning, like to go to Starbucks, which is in the center of her town. And I was walking and I went blocks. I didn't see anyone. I mean, presumably they're in their house or something, but it's like, was there an emergency I don't know about?
Right.
Like, it was just like nobody at all. And it was just like, oh, okay, I guess this is America. I just forgotten.
Right.
Like,
See, reverse culture shock. When I was working at a radio station, I remember one of my coworkers, he was also from, maybe from the States. He was a foreigner. And then her mom, his mom came to visit one day. And after work, you know, he took her onto the subway to go out for dinner. And the Chinese subway in Beijing, you know about it, right?
Yeah,
after work, it's
packed.
And her mom was like, oh, is this some kind of a national festival? Is this some kind of national holiday? Why is all these people out? She's like, no, this is just after work rush hour. So, I think for them, it's also shocking to see so many people.
I just thought of this just now. Another huge difference, it's a massive difference, is the grocery store. So like, yeah. As an American, I go to this store that's not too far from my house here in Wuhan. It's called Aeon. And I go to the area where they sell milk and yogurt products until I narrow in on the one tiny little shelf that has 3 brands of cheese. Or maybe if I'm lucky, they have 4. And then you go back to the States and there's an aisle of cheese.
Yes.
And okay, that is one thing I do want back.
Right. But you can get them online. You know that, right?
Yeah. I know. There's special places and ways to order them.
I just ordered my, I don't know how many, probably the 4th, 5th 5-pound block of cheddar cheese from Ireland. And also I got a 5-pound block of butter from Belgium. There's so many different choices. And I get them on, the Taobao website.
Yeah.
And they got here the next day because they're, shipped out in Beijing. So I understand what you're saying. But ask your wife to go on Taobao, and there are all kinds of cheese for sale. All kinds.
Another thing, this is more of a similarity that people miss, is that people say in China they have wet markets. But, I ask you, what is a farmer's market if not a mobile wet market? Because all it is like farmers showing up with all of their vegetables and stuff for sale. And basically, that's, all the cheapest vegetables are like down the street at the wet market.
Or the freshest.
Basically, indoor farm. Yeah. And you just go in and you could potentially haggle. I don't haggle because the prices are so cheap anyway.
Right.
So, you can get a bag of oranges or a bag of whatever you're looking for. I get lemons and limes a lot lately. But, it's very
I love
expensive.
those markets.
Yeah, they're great. And then, if sometimes they don't have everything you need. So, you 2 trips, you get to go to the store for like toothpaste, or you could order it for your home.
I think, back when I was a kid in Wuhan, that's when life was slower, right? Life was normal. I feel like sometimes I feel like that's what life should be. People didn't spend all their time, looking at their cell phone or glued to the TV. They lived. And back then, my grandma would go to the market every day with fresh markets to get fresh vegetables and fish and other things, and even chicken, you name it, eggs. That was just part of daily life. And when people get off work, I remember the market we had, and for a lot of people, it's on their way back to home. So they would go grab a few vegetables and take them home and cook their dinner. But nowadays is, you shop once every few days, or when we went to the States, you shop once a week. And then for a few days, your fridge is like full of stuff. It's too full. And then by the end of the week, it's like too empty. Yeah. So
a lot of Americans have a pantry. So they have like a special little room that's like a walk-in closet that is full of food that you could have, potentially you have food in there for like a year. Or you have pasta and chips and all kinds of stuff that, dried goods, that coffee, tea. Yeah.
Have you noticed how in China they eat less canned food?
Yeah.
Like canned food is popular in the States, right?
Very.
Here it's like it's not part of everyday life. Like usually people don't eat canned food unless like you're stuck at, a certain place. You can't get anything else. So maybe that's another difference when it comes to cooking. Here in China, they value fresh cooking a lot more. Yeah, when something comes in packaged, it's like, even though they're more expensive and they look shinier and they look nicer, but still, people kind of like,
it's not as good. Yeah. The gentleman we had on the other day, Morris, he talked, he was one of the first person that introduced me that, it's time for fish for dinner. I'm going to the store. So like, okay,
nice.
On a daily basis, he'll just go buy what he needs to. You see that with a lot of older people
They
too.
have the time.
People in the early morning, I'm on my way to like work, and I see people already on the way home
from the market,
and they're carrying like bags of like vegetables. That's today's vegetables.
Right.
That's what they're going to eat today.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, I get a sense of warmth and joy seeing that, because I feel like that's life. That's what life should be. You have the time to live your life. And is there a sense of stability and peace? It's not fancy and it's not, wealthy, but somehow there's comfort to it. To know that you have the time and the health and the safe, you're safe enough to every day go to the market, get fresh food, for today. I think the joy in that, a lot of people miss out on the joy of that in their chase for a better life. But maybe that's just because you are at a different stage.
There's another thing. In addition to like just local markets, what you see in all cities in China, even really big cities like where you're living, like somebody who grows oranges will just suddenly be on the corner selling oranges. So like you're on your way home and you're like, oh, cool. There's the guy who grew oranges. He just rode into town that day and he's selling oranges. So you can literally buy like the freshest possible fruit and vegetables.
Right.
Like all the time, because they're just people that, okay, I grew ginger. So now there's a guy selling ginger on the corner. Okay, I'm just going to get some ginger now.
They probably like just came from some village, some distance away. Yeah, to get some cash, for what they produce. And also, I think it's for the people who are living in the city. It would be a nice novelty almost, on your way home. Hey, fresh oranges, literally plucked from the tree like this morning. So a nice treat. I like it. I like that sense of, how do you say it? Liveliness, like people are living their lives, not just trying to be like machines, not like you just trying to make a better living. You know what I'm trying to get? The sense of warmth and liveliness. Yeah, I really value that.
One thing, because of the pace of construction here that I've noticed is that when I was living in Beijing, especially, like I could always hear the distant sound of someone redoing their apartment.
Not pleasant
so
ones.
around 7:38 in the morning, you could hear often, because my wife and I, we moved around a lot, and like not everywhere, but a lot of the places we lived, people would be redoing their apartment or maybe setting their apartment up for the first time, depending on where you were living. And like there was the sound that's not as common in the States. Once a neighborhood has been built, it's just there now.
It's built.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's the thing. When you buy an apartment in China or a house, mostly apartments, if it's a new apartment building, what you get is like concrete apartment with nothing else in it. I think that would be a shock if a foreigner moved to China, bought an apartment without knowing that it's not furnished, right? And by furnished, we don't just mean furniture. We mean everything. What you get is just the, what do you call it? There's a term in Chinese, but
barren?
It's bare. Yeah, it's just like concrete walls. There are new ones now.
But, not always, baby. There's a company called Vanka World, and they have like, we lived in one of their apartment complexes, and they come standard. Nice. So all of them have the same chandelier and the same door and the same paint job and the same.
Same chandelier? Even chandelier?
Even the chandelier, the light switches, like the same everything. So like, yeah, you can, most of the apartments are what you're talking about, where you move in and then you do decorate it yourself or hire someone to decorate it. Or you can actually buy these like prefab already done inside, depending on it depends on the housing brand that you go to.
Yeah, I would definitely pick the second one. I might change the chandelier, but because for, young couples buying their first apartment, you can see their mental state deteriorate when they go through the months where they furnish their apartment. Because you literally have to go to these markets to get, the wallpaper or to get tiles for the floor and to get the toilet for the bathroom. I mean, like, who wants to go through this? Just excruciating a process.
Increasingly, a lot of Americans now do this slowly. So they'll because there's like Home Depot and all these really big brands. Right. So this is a huge difference. A lot of people are like, oh, I could be a carpenter and a plumber. And so then they go through this they'll do one room and then they'll do like one room and then they add a patio.
Be like, it's not that bad.
A lot of people hire tradesmiths to come and either do it or fix what they've done later.
If you have the cash and you want to come in and buy your own apartment, make sure you ask whether or not it comes furnished or it's just like a bare apartment. And by bare, we mean bare, like nothing in it.
Yeah.
So that's something that you need to get ready for. Part of the culture shock.
Yeah, it is. But we are out of time, baby.
Again.
I think we should talk about renting. And buying an apartment. That could be its own show, just renting and buying an apartment.
Sure. Well, I've rented. I've never really bought one. But sure.
I've shopped for one.
Really? Well, we can hear about that next time.
All right, we'll talk to you guys next time. Always great to talk with you, baby.
Yes, thank you, Jason. Thank you, our dear listeners. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.